It's interesting with Beethoven, we so often speak about the man first before we speak about the music. With other composers, you dive in and start describing the piece, but Beethoven seems to demand that we reckon with his personality and his creative persona as it plays out in the music. So these two pieces, the Eroica Symphony and the Mass in C, were both composed just around the same time when Beethoven was in his mid-30s. The most important biographical point about that moment in time was that his deafness was becoming permanent, and he was deeply aware of it. And he wrote about it both in prose and seems to have struggled with it in his music as well. So one idea of the eroica, the heroicism in the piece, is certainly tied up with Beethoven himself as a creative artist. But initially the piece was modeled on ideas he had around Napoleon, and it was initially dedicated to Napoleon. In fact, he first called it the Bonaparte Symphony. And then famously, in May of 1804, Napoleon declared himself emperor, and Beethoven went back to the title page and scratched it out with a knife so vigorously that there's a hole in the manuscript, which we can see today. And he replaced it with a dedication to the memory of a great man. So it seems to be a piece that he associated with heroic qualities in an individual, heroicism in general. And each of its four movements seems to have some relationship with that idea. The first movement is built on an E-flat major chord, so this is itself the key of heroism. It's the key often that trumpets and horns play in. It's a key associated with nobility or aristocracy. But the music is volatile and dynamic in the extreme and unstable and seems to be searching, as if to say maybe that the life for the hero is never easy. The path isn't a smooth one, and there's a lot to be wrestled with. And in musical terms, the wrestling was unprecedented. Beethoven introduces two chords simultaneously grating against each other at one point. He shifts the rhythm from 3 to 2 and 2 on top of 3, and it seems to be something of a wrestling match, musically speaking, even while being wondrously invigorating and exciting music. It has militaristic tropes in it, musical ideas that suggest the military, which might be associated with Bonaparte, or more generally with the idea of heroism, but it isn't a particularly militaristic idea. It's not filled with a military march, for example. It's not a musical depiction of battle or anything like that. The second movement is where it enters realms that music had never entered before in the Great Funeral March. And it does seem to be a funeral march in memory of a great man. The drums of the processional are represented in many respects by the strings rather than by the timpani, although the timpani participates as well. And it moves from doleful, very sad music to beautiful, loving stretches, and then to moments of glory that seem to suggest almost an afterlife. And at the end, the theme of the funeral march breaks up into little pieces, as if maybe it's all been a dream, or that the idea of heroism itself dissolves. The third movement is exhilarating in its main scherzo form. Michael Tilson Thomas once called it, "This is music for the best day of your life." It's joyous music, and the middle section, the trio, is a famous moment for 3 solo horns, fiendishly difficult to play and a glorious sound. In the last movement, Beethoven returns to a theme that he used at various stages throughout his life. We call it the Eroica Theme now. It's actually a country dance. It's called an English dance in German, an English. The interesting thing about the English dance in Beethoven's time is that it was the only dance that was allowed to be danced with the aristocracy and the servant class together at the same time. So it was unusually democratic in the way that it was performed in social settings. And this must be part of what Beethoven was interested in. He goes through a series of variations, which would have been not unprecedented, but quite unusual for a symphonic movement to end a symphony. And to my mind, it allows the composer, because he's taking an idea and constantly transforming it from one thing to another, it throws the attention back again on the composer to say, look what I can do, as if the creativity here is what's heroic about the piece, and the composer himself is the hero. Right toward the end, there's a beautiful oboe solo and a glorious moment in which this theme is transformed yet again into something sublime. It's a kind of transfiguration at the end of the symphony, an idea that the Romantics picked up directly from the Eroica Symphony. For generations, composers would take this idea of transforming a thematic material toward the end of a symphony or toward the end of any major work and transfiguring it as if to project it into another life, the afterlife, the next life. So again, we have the idea of maybe the life of the hero, the funeral march for the hero, and then the Mount Parnassus, the life afterward for the hero. This is the essential shape of the Eroica Symphony.